It's Sunday morning, and we are back with episode number 2 of Protecting Military Families with Chris Brochu. Chris, welcome back. Episode 2, syllabus week is over. We're going to get into some serious stuff throughout the rest of these episodes, especially today. We're going to talk a lot about life insurance today for the military families as well as civilians and everybody that needs help with their life insurance. But 1 week in, how you feeling about getting actually going, talking about law?
Casey, good morning. The jitters are gone. We're ready to get into it. I feel like we've laid a good roadmap. We've got some really interesting topics today. We're going to save the duckling story for the end. Protecting military families and protecting duck families. So
you did do protecting the duck families. We will absolutely get into that and let the people know how you saved a bunch of ducklings. Truly important story that we will get into, absolutely. But we will start with life insurance, military life insurance, all kinds of things that military families will need to know. So let's just start with the obvious. When you're in the military, you get life insurance. Let's just start by telling people how to understand what coverage they have for their life insurance, how it works, all that. So just a broad definition, if you will, of what kind of life insurance you get when you're in the military.
Absolutely. I think this will be, a cornerstone of podcasts and radio shows moving forward. The first thing to remember is that service member group life insurance and veteran group life insurance make up some of the largest group policies in the country. So if you're in the military, you don't have the ability to choose all of the types of private life insurance for that military policy, but that's okay because they offer life insurance that goes up to $400,000, and the premium is reasonable at $28 a month. And we're going to get into what that entails, but primarily just know if you are an active duty service member, if you're in the National Guard, if you're a reservist, if you do one-day muster duty, or if you are a spouse or dependent of somebody that fits into one of those categories, your life insurance, if you're currently paying premiums, would include service member group life insurance.
Talk to me a little bit about group life insurance in general. I'm not going to assume that everybody understands how it works. Maybe it's a little self-explanatory. The word group, there's a group of you, but what is group life insurance, and just kind of overall, how does it differentiate from what else you could get?
A lot of the private policies that, or certain types of financial instruments out there have a number of exclusions. Service member group life insurance is different because although there are certain exceptions and certain exclusions, the primary goal that allowed Congress to enact the Service Member Group Life Insurance Act was to afford military families protection. So some of the wartime exclusions, intentional infliction of bodily harm exclusions, and other types of common exclusions would apply to certain private insurance, but maybe wouldn't apply to military insurance. And essentially, it allows up to $400,000 in coverage, so that way, if the service member dies in combat or dies in a training exercise, that military family would be covered. But there are certain times when, and one of the main issues that we're going to talk about today, or cases that I've helped a widowed service member, is talking about some of the examples where maybe it isn't as squarely defined, or maybe the beneficiary form was submitted, but maybe it wasn't paid out.
Okay, I like that. All right, so we were talking a little bit before the show started, and you were kind of telling me how this works when you're in the military, how you understand it works when you get this life insurance from the military. Tell the listeners kind of what you were telling me, how you understand this kind of thing is done when you're in the military. It happens pretty quick. You're signing some stuff as you understand it. Paint a picture for the people listening on how that actually works.
Absolutely. The first thing to remember is that, I wasn't in the military, and certainly the experiences that some of my clients or friends have told me may differ from your experience. So I want to just make that clear. We're not generalizing. We're not here hating on the military, but what we're doing is maybe expanding on some of the things that weren't explained as clearly as what we can do sitting here on a radio show. So the way that a few of my clients described it for me is that when you show up to boot camp, between screaming at you, they make you sign all of these documents, and some of these documents, including your service member group life insurance, would be in that pile, and you get a quick rundown of what your rights are, and then you're off to the next exercise or activity. And primarily, once you set that up, the pay isn't coming from, say, your checking account. It's coming from your leave and earnings statement, or it's direct deposit. So you may not even feel that money coming out. You may not see it. And obviously, if you were stressed about what you were going through at that time, maybe you don't remember the instructions that you're provided. Maybe you didn't read it entirely all the way through, and that's okay. That's what we're here to help you talk about and get through. But ideally, once you understand how SGLI works, then your family can understand how to fight back if the policy isn't paid to the right person or coverage is denied or something like that.
Talk to me a little bit about what you just brought up, SGLI. What is it? For those that don't know, just kind of explain it a little bit so we can understand more about what, obviously military people are going to understand what you're talking about, but for people that don't, just what is SGLI?
SGLI is the acronym for Service Members Group Life Insurance, and Service Members Group Life Insurance is governed by a federal statute commonly referred to as SIGLIA, or the Service Member Group Life Insurance Act. And one of the cases that I wanted to talk about that involves a service member group life insurance was a client of mine. And just to be clear as well, when I have one of these cases, I take them anywhere in the country. Although I'm only licensed in the state of Florida to practice law, if I get a client that calls me and their issue is in another state outside of Florida, as long as I have local counsel in whatever state I'm filing that is licensed to practice law in that state, then I can represent that service member in federal court. And there are also certain administrative rules that also would allow an attorney to practice in any administrative court across the country. So in this particular matter, although the client was from outside of Florida and the lawsuit was in federal court inside of Florida, essentially what happened was we had a service member and his fiance were both active duty Air Force. And unfortunately, the service member's fiance is no longer with us. And when his spouse went to submit her claim form for his SGLI policy, the service member group life insurance, the insurance company came back and they said, "You're not the beneficiary. His ex-wife is." Fairly common, as unfortunate as it is. And one other thing to make clear, unlike some of these state private policies that prohibit payment to an ex-spouse, these federal policies, service member group life insurance, veterans group life insurance, and federal employee group life insurance, they will actually pay an ex-spouse. But in this particular case, the service member had proof that her fiance had submitted something via email to the Air Force. And unfortunately, the Air Force, they make mistakes just like all of us. Nothing against them. Just if you make a mistake, you got to own up to it. And they never updated the personnel file for the fiance. So the last beneficiary on file was the ex-spouse, and that's who they paid. And over 2 years later of fighting and fighting, they finally found me, the family did, and they were actually referred by a firm from a different state that knew that I practiced this type of life insurance, said, "Can you help them?" So we filed a lawsuit in federal court, and the insurance company paid in full. Wow. So, and we had proof that the personnel, although the law says that the beneficiary form has to be submitted while the policy is active and in force and to the military service members branch of service, we had proof of that just because the military branch didn't update the personnel file doesn't mean they never received it, right?
Right.
So
that is fascinating. This is 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We're protecting military families with Chris Brochu. Chris, I have two things that I really want to get into off of what you just said, but I'll start with the second one and then come back to the first one.
Sure.
The case you just cited, obviously we're not going to get into super detail with that, but how often does something like that happen? How often do you get that call that somebody changed their information and it wasn't actually changed as it should have been, and they pay out the wrong person, or they try to pay out the wrong person? Is that something that happens a lot?
Too often. And unfortunately, we're not just picking on service member group life insurance or veterans group life insurance. Those cases may be a bit more rare, but certainly other insurance companies that offer private term group, any type of life insurance or those similar types of financial documents. So you just have to always be aware of it. And if your loved one told you that you were the beneficiary and that they submitted everything or that everything is all set, and one day down the line you realize or you're being told that something, the beneficiary form or something isn't what you thought it was, that's a serious red flag. And unfortunately, in this type of situation, I don't have a number. Obviously, the insurance company would. They would know how many of these types of claims they see. But I will tell you, I think there are plenty of people that would have accepted that. My client's an absolute fighter, and she wasn't going to let she was mother of two young kids. She wasn't about to let them suffer from, a mistake that truly wasn't her family's. I mean, her fiance did the right thing. She did the right thing, and they shouldn't have to suffer the consequences of a mistake they didn't make. So
absolutely, well done by her. So in your professional opinion, if you're ever in this situation in terms of you're the beneficiary and you get changed to be a beneficiary or something like that, you should keep every single piece of documentation that you ever get, just in case something like this would happen to you. Absolutely.
I always advise my clients, and whether or not it's somebody that I represent or somebody that calls me and asks for advice, and it's, maybe it's not a case that even fits our criteria of representation, but I still want to help them understand the process. If it's not in writing, folks, it never happened, right? Because ultimately you're gonna talk on these recorded lines, and as soon as they catch wind that maybe there's a claim or a dispute involved, recordings disappear. I can't tell you why a company would do that, but just know that's not something from a reality TV show. That happens every day.
Wow.
And then the other part of it too is if you have that electronic communication, if you have the certified mail receipt from a letter that you sent in, if you have proof that the company received what you sent to them or the communication, that's going to be pretty hard for them to deny. But if you say, well, I talked to this representative or this customer service agent, and they told me X, that manager of that department is going to come back and say, oh, they didn't have that conversation, or they didn't say that, or she didn't know what she was talking about. So the best thing to do to protect yourself, you just keep that written record, and always maintain some sort of record keeping, whether it be a hard copy or folder in your email, to just make sure to cover all your bases.
That's crazy that would actually happen, but obviously you know what you're talking about. So this is something else I wrote down from that example you were giving, and I just want to clarify it. So you said you're licensed to practice law in Florida, but if somebody calls you from a different state, you figure out a way to make that work with other firms. How does it work in terms of if somebody like in Indiana, right? How do they decide where that comes from? Where you live? Like if you live in Indiana, that's like where you signed your policy at boot camp, like the state by state thing. Explain to me how that works.
So you would have done really well in your 1L year of civil procedure, because that's exactly right. How do you know where you filed the lawsuit? And typically, it's where the policy was incepted, right? Wherever they signed it. Sometimes the statutory language or the contract language will tell you, hey, you've got to file it in this state, or it's governed by these rules. And most of the time, especially with the service member group life insurance and veterans group life insurance, if there's a lawsuit that arises, it's typically in whatever part of the country you reside. So although that policy was entered into by an Air Force veteran outside of the state of Florida, my client was living in the state of Florida when we filed the lawsuit. So that's how we'll determine where to file it. But typically you look at the contract language, you look at the state and federal law, you look at if there's an applicable statute and where the person resides. And most of the time, so long as it involves a SGLI or VGLI policy, it will end up in federal court. So
it's interesting. It's fascinating how that works. As soon as you said it, it popped in my head, like, how do you know exactly? But you're the guy to know. Chris Brochu, we're protecting military families right here on 104.5 WOKV. If you need Chris's assistance, you can call the number at 904-201-1771. Chris, talk to me about this. Common life insurance delays and denials for military families. What are the common things you see or the biggest holdups that you consistently deal with in terms of life insurance and the denials for it?
I would say I want to be clear on a few things because Casey and I are talking about SGLI and VGLI and those types of military life insurance policies, service members and veterans. But a lot of my clients that are military, they may have private policies as well. They may have term, group, universal, a number of different policies. A lot of times, let's say if you were in the military and now you joined a federal agency, United States Postal Service, Marshals, FBI, you would also have a federal employee group life insurance that you would be allowed to have as well, potentially. So the next part that we're going to cover on delays and denials, I just want to make clear, this is going to not only cover SGLI and VGLI, but we're also going to cover federal employee group life insurance and all of those private areas where you may have a policy as well, term, universal, group, things like that.
Okay, that's a good good clarification to have there. So you mentioned something we already talked about, by the way, SGLI. You said VGLI? Is that what? Give us a little bit of that.
VGLI is when a service member is no longer in the military and their policy transfers from their policy as an active duty, reservist, National Guard member to veteran status. And that is all. I won't get into the way that a service member does that. They have plenty of resources. Talk to your JAG office. You're going to learn a lot of this in a lot of your offboarding classes, your TAP classes, where they're going to talk about transferring. Those are certainly something that you need to consider and be aware of. But VGLI is simply the same type of military insurance, but it is offered to veterans, whereas SGLI is only available to those service member categories that we talked about: reservist, active duty, National Guard.
Absolutely. And there's one more little bit of that I want to just have you touch on here is the TSGLI. Tell us about that.
TSGLI is simply the military's version, and it doesn't fit into its own neat category civilian-wise. So the civilian equivalent of TSGLI would be probably a mix between an accidental death and dismemberment policy and a long-term disability policy. But TSGLI is simply the traumatic injury rider to a service member group life insurance. So service member that elects to pay premiums for service member group life insurance pays $29 a month. 28 of those dollars goes towards their service member group life insurance, and $1 goes to the traumatic injury rider. TSGLI does not transfer to veterans group life insurance. It's only offered to service members that have SGLI, that service member group life insurance. But TSGLI, just to run down quickly, and we're going to have a separate episode on this because there are so many different components there. We're going to talk about traumatic events and qualifying losses and all of the different ways and criterias and medical professionals that you need. But the biggest thing for TSGLI, traumatic injury rider, you need to be paying SGLI premiums or be injured in a combat zone, where if you're in a combat zone and you're not paying for service member group life insurance, Department of Defense is actually covering your premiums. And there are certain areas where they're doing that, certainly combat zones. So if you are paying for service member group life insurance premiums, the next thing you'd look at is, did you have a traumatic event? Traumatic event, think on-duty accidents you could have been involved in, something combat-related, IED, gunshot, fragment from a mortar or grenade, or some training exercise injury. Off-duty, you've got an automobile accident, ATV. It could be anything from anything that causes physical bodily harm, and the only traumatic event that doesn't involve physical bodily harm under TSGLI would be a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. But presently, TSGLI only covers those types of physical bodily harm. And then there's this massive list of qualifying losses under the federal statute. And we'll break down a lot of those in a later episode and cover all the TSGLI topics, but just a quick hitter of the qualifying losses. You've got paralysis, amputation, sensory loss, burns, coma, 15-day inpatient hospitalization, surgeries that require a service member to have assistance doing activities of daily living. So let's say you're involved in a training exercise and you broke your femur and your back. You would, after surgery, you may need assistance going to the bathroom, getting dressed, transferring in and out of bed, toileting, getting on and off the toilet. Those would also be ADLs, that inability to perform activities of daily living. That's also included under TSGLI. And essentially the bottom line is, if you can prove to your military branch that you were paying service member group life insurance premiums, that you were involved in a traumatic event, and that within 2 years of that traumatic event, you suffered a qualifying loss that meets the federal criteria under the statute, then you may be entitled to up to $100,000 per traumatic event. So if you had a traumatic event in 2007 and you had one in 2014 and you meet the criteria for both, those would potentially both qualify for up to $100,000. And the important thing to know about TSGLI, unlike virtually everything else that we have in law and in life and in our country, is that there's no statute of limitation. Meaning, if you were injured, TSGLI was enacted by Congress in December of 2005, but it dates back to October 7th, 2001. So if you were injured in a traumatic event from October 7th, 01 to present day, there's no statute of limitation. You can bring a claim at any time. And let's say you submitted a claim back in 03, 04, 05, right? When we've got a ton of service members coming back with injuries from combat deployments and training exercise. Even if the military denied you back then, if there is something material that we can submit now, maybe there's a medical record you never submitted, maybe there's something more that we can include, we can reopen that claim. So just know, even though time has passed, TSGLI is one of the ways. If you were injured, again, October 7th, 2001 to present day, that's certainly something that you need to discuss with your military family and something that you need to explore, because it may be a benefit that you have that you may not know about. So
absolutely. That's something that you definitely need to make sure you know about if you are in that situation. If you missed any of that first segment, go back and listen, WOKV.com. There's also a stream version of the show. We will tell you about that, how to find it on the other side of this break. When we come back, more to do about life insurance, military life insurance, regular civilian life insurance as well. We also have a story about ducks. You will want to hear it. It is a good one. So we'll do all that on the other side. We are protecting military families with Chris Brochu right here on 104.5 WOKV. Welcome back, 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We are protecting military families with Chris Brochu. I am Casey Kurtz. On the other side, right before the break, we told you a stream version of the show. You can find it on Chris's website, brochulaw.com. Chris, I went on the website and there I was. Like I just, there I was. It was right on the site. There we were doing the show from last week. Our guy Justin from Nova Productions was hooking that up. He's going to continue to do that. So if you want to see what we're looking at currently, you can see us doing the show with the help of Justin. So you can go check that out, obviously. There's a little more content on there than you get on the radio, a couple extra topics that you might want to hear about. So if you listen on the radio and you need more, definitely go hit up Chris's website, brochulaw.com. All right, Chris, we talked before the break. SGLI, TSGLI, VGLI, a lot of LIs, but a lot of them. So we understand what that is, and if you missed it, definitely go back and listen. You can find the stream or WOKV.com to find the audio version of it. But let's go back to the common life insurance delays and denials you see and deal with every day.
At break, we were talking about getting into service member group life insurance, traumatic injury rider, and veterans group life insurance. But I just want to say, before we get into delays and denials, not only do we include military life insurance in those delays and denials, but also the military families that have the private life insurance, the term, the group, the universal type policies. These all bundle into the same thing. If your loved one served in the military and then became a federal employee, this would also include them. The only thing that I'm not going to talk about, because it's not an area where I represent individuals, would be ERISA, but that's for another attorney to talk about on a separate show. So we're going to get into delays and denials. The common delay that you see, which you should immediately flag your attention, is if you have submitted a claim form and a death certificate and you don't receive a check in the mail within 30 days, right? You're a beneficiary, your loved one has passed away. If you submit your loved one, their death certificate and your claim form as the beneficiary, and you don't receive a check in the mail within 30 days, red flag, red flag, red flag.
30 days.
30 days.
Not a long period of time. 30 days is why is that the number?
I think that is a completely reasonable time, because of the fact these life insurance companies have armies of claims agents and attorneys, and they have so many people reviewing these things. And importantly, they see these claims every day. So you may only experience this type of thing once in your life. This claims agent, this customer service rep, this department, they process these claims every single day. If they see something that is unusual, it would be rare. I mean, the same issues appear over and over and over again. So that's why, again, we've got to remember the common theme here, folks, and that is insurance companies are in the business of making money, right? The more they take in premiums and the less they pay out, the more they make, right? So if you don't receive your check within 30 days of submitting your death certificate and your claim form, red flag, red flag, red flag. We should probably just buy a red flag every time there's something. Hey, alarm, maybe a bell or something. But just anytime we have a common theme where everybody that's delayed or denied experiences the same issue, we've got to shout it out and make it known. So
we're gonna wave the flag like NASCAR. It's gonna be.
That's right. I don't watch NASCAR, but that seems like a good reference. I like that.
Yeah. It's a conversation for another day. We'll get into NASCAR as we go along. But nonetheless, okay. So it's day 31. It's day 35. It's day 45. What's the first thing you do? You don't hear anything back. Nothing's happened. You get no check in the mail. Do we call you? Is that what we should do? There's
actually a life insurance company. I won't put them on blast. I got a call from a client that I helped, and they paid it out once they hired me. But 2 years. Claiming
2 years.
2 years. Not denied. Not, hey, it's denied. It doesn't fit in this category. It's, we're still investigating this. 2 years later. They've got everything they need. She's submitted God knows how many documents. 2 years.
That's insane. So, I mean, and this is like money that people need to like live. Like, this is incredibly important money. So they call you 2 years in this particular case, but so they call you. What do you do? What's the first thing you do when you get that call? Hey, it's been 50 days. I haven't heard anything. You get on the phone, you file a lawsuit. What do you do? Great
question. The first thing that we're going to look at is, well, what insurance company is it with? what type of policy is it, right? In that particular case, it was a federal employee group life insurance. So similar to the service members that we talk about, anything that's a federal policy, and in this particular case, it was a veteran that had worked for the federal government. So he had left it to a beneficiary who the insurance company never found. And basically what the law says, especially this federal law, is that they're very specific off of the order of precedence, meaning that they can't just sit on a claim forever, right? They've got to pay it out, and they've got a duty to go ahead and find who this money's owed to because they know it's not them. And in this particular case, they couldn't find the named beneficiary, whether he's, moved to a different country, dead. I mean, we don't know, but we know that my client is the next in line, and they've had 2 years to make a decision. So what happens is I come on, I figure out, okay, well, what's the insurance company's standpoint? So the first thing we do, we contact them. We say, this is our client. Please, if you have already, received any documents, please provide them to us. Please provide us anything involving the claim. And if you haven't paid anything yet, please, suspend payment until we have the opportunity to investigate. We think that this, there's a possibility that this claim could be contested. So essentially what happens is we, from there, get the insurance company side of the story. It's usually,
right.
We didn't mean to request that death certificate, not in this particular case, but others. We requested the same documents several times, right? I mean, it's just kicking the can down the road. And why? The longer they have your money, the more they make, right?
Sure.
They got to pay a little bit of interest on it, but ultimately a delay favors them. It's money. It's money that they get to keep in their coffers. So what happened in this particular case is we just cite the law and we say, you know what, if you don't pay this out, we're going to file a lawsuit against you. And guess what? Sometimes the insurance companies, they don't care. They say, bring it on. Let's have it. Right.
Wow. Yeah.
And so then you got to file a lawsuit. But other times, they'll send it up the chain and have someone, I'm assuming an attorney, look at it and say, you know what, this is probably something we should pay. But it really depends on the situation and the type of claim, and if it's governed by federal or state law, and a number of things. So
absolutely. Coming off that, you said sometimes you settle, sometimes there's a lawsuit.
When I say settle, I'm not saying that we settle in terms of, hey, the policy's 100, we'll take 40, right? Sure, yeah. There are instances where we have to negotiate because they have an exclusion or they have something like that where the client will say, you know what, we need to get this settled because the idea of taking this all the way to a trial and losing would not help my family, right? There are certain times where you have to settle. But the instance I'm talking about is this money is due, right? You need to tender it immediately. And oh, by the way, it's the full policy amount plus interest. We're not taking it. This isn't let's make a deal, right?
Right.
You either pay what you're supposed to plus interest, or we're going to file a lawsuit against you.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's and I think that's I think that's reasonable, right? I mean, it's you've had 2 years, right? We're not giving you 2 days. I mean, you've had plenty of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of that, how often do you see insurance companies decide to fight you guys in a lawsuit? Does it happen more often or less often than saying you get them to just pay it out?
I think it really depends on what stage you're at. So the next episode that we're going to cover next week, we're going to get into that, and it's called Interpleader. Okay. Interpleader and life insurance claims, I mean, they are they go hand in hand, right? I mean, that's like Forrest Gump and Bubba Gump Shrimp Co., right? I mean, those are like...
I was going to say peanut butter and jelly, but
yeah,
same thing.
Happy Gilmore reference, lamb and tuna fish, right? But I think that it really all depends on the company, depends on the claim. But Interpleader is one of those mechanisms that an attorney like myself can assist with when we can notify the life insurance company before the policy has been paid out. Then the insurance company, and we'll talk about this in the Interpleader episode next week, the insurance company has a choice, right? The life insurance company has a choice. The choice is we either pay whatever party we think is lawfully entitled, and if we get it wrong, we now owe, a double payment, right? We're liable for both of these payments, or we just file it in interpleader with the court, and the court has to decide, right? So they file a lawsuit, they name every party that they think may have a claim, and then the court protects the money, and then it, determines who's entitled to it.
Sure. And that's going to come up obviously next Sunday, like Chris told you about, right here on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. So that's next Sunday. But right now, I want to ask you this. This kind of sparked off what you were talking about. You say, and this is a guess I'm asking you, but how many people do you think right now are dealing with something very similar to what you just described? It's been years since they submitted for the money they're owed in a life insurance policy. How many people do you think are sitting out there right now waiting for that to happen and just don't know to call you, or don't know to reach out to somebody for help, and are just kind of in limbo?
The 2-year would be probably an outlier. That's pretty extreme. I have seen a number of delays go several months. The primary reason is most states, and I'll use Florida as an example, there's a thing called a contestability period. So essentially, if I signed up for a life insurance application today, and let's say just for fun and for the sake of argument, today is also the date that they issue the policy, right? So we submit the application today, and the insurance company comes back and says, great, here's your policy. If I die within 2 years of today, under Florida law, the life insurance company has an automatic right to review the claim. And their review is because I died within the contestability period based under Florida law, right?
Sure.
That 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do is, and this is like, a common tactic, is they'll say, great, we want to look back at Chris's life insurance application. We want to see if he was truthful, right? And in our previous episode, we talked about how, we've got that agent sitting in your living room, and they're like, Chris, you don't need to tell them about the prescription. You don't need to tell them about the medical injuries that you've had. That's not important. They'll look into it, right? Well, I die within those 2 years. They're going to go back, and they get a number of years, up to 10, to go back and look to see my medical history. And they'll say, aha, Chris wasn't being truthful. He misrepresented his medical history on this application. And that was a material misrepresentation. And that verbiage is important. Why? Because that is what the insurance company is going to tell you in the denial. They'll tell it to you on the phone. They'll tell it to you in a letter. And what material misrepresentation is, folks, is it's when the insurance company says, if we had known this information about Chris's medical history, we would have either denied coverage or we would have increased the premium payment. And therefore, the policy is denied. Here are, family, here are the premiums that Chris paid. See you later. That's one of the common examples. And that is probably one of the most common delays that you'll see as well when we talk about more of those traditional life insurance policies. I'm not talking about the accidental death and dismemberment. Those are a completely separate type of examination and policy. But primarily, the material misrepresentation during the contestability period, and the most common things that you see during delays too is an insurance company, they're calling you and they're asking you for the same document over and over again. They're telling you that they're investigating this. Oh, well, this week it was Cindy from, the management department, and the next week it's, Carol, her boss, right? I mean, it's just this perpetual investigation that goes nowhere, right? It's an endless loop. And then the other thing that you see too is they request, immaterial documents. They're requesting things that the contract doesn't allow and they're not entitled to under statute. Another red flag. They're requesting, you resubmit the claim form, right? They're paying you. There's this funny thing that insurance companies do. So when your money is due, right? Like let's say I only want to use me. I don't want to jinx anyone else. Let's say
Sure.
I pass away and money is due to my loved one. They're supposed to just cut the check, right? Here you go. Here's your lump sum payout. Well, what they'll do is they'll say, well, we want to safeguard your money. We put it in this nice checking account here. And now here's your checkbook. And you can write checks out of this checkbook, but we're going to safeguard it for you. Well, if you didn't elect that, they don't have a right to do that, right? Their job is to pay you the entire amount. Their job isn't to continue to line their own pockets.
I got you. Okay, that's a lot of good information. I was about to ask you what that meant, but you did a good job describing it. If you missed any of that, 104.5 WOKV.com to find out more about what Chris was talking about right there. But let's move on to a different part of this with the life insurance policy. Obviously, you got to make payments, right? Nothing's free. So you got to make payments. But let's say you want to contest a payment. Something's not right, and you want to just figure out what's going on there. How do you go about doing that? Is there ways to do that? Is there one way to do it? How does it work?
Absolutely. I think one of the statistics which was incredibly alarming is there was some percentage over 50%. I don't remember where I saw it, but it was a study that said over 50% of life insurance policies will lapse before they're ever adjudicated, right? Before there's ever a claim or a denial or anything like that. And one of the things that you should look at your policy at home and determine if this is happening to you. Let's say that you have the same premium payment for years and years and years, and all of a sudden one day the insurance company says, you know what, we're going to jack that up 40%. Your $100 payment is now 40% higher. That is something that is contractual, and that is something that would be determined by your policy. So that is how at some point, this is all based off of numbers. This is a numbers game, folks. So the older people get, the statistics say that they might die, right, as opposed to a young person. So therefore, they're going to increase the premiums and policies might lapse. There are also very specific ways that policies, that an insurance company these steps they have to follow in order to allow a policy to lapse. So they've got to give notice. If you have several people listed on the policy, they've got to send notice to both of them, depending on what state you live in. There are very, very specific things. When you miss a payment, it goes into a grace period, and then you have the ability to get out of that. Sometimes the insurance company will allow you to reinstate the policy. But those are all things that go into our review. And just because a policy has lapsed doesn't mean that it's not payable. I mean, there are plenty of instances where you can find that, and this was a case that I saw, the woman had unfortunately fallen ill of cancer and lost the ability to speak. So what she did is she actually had this touched on her cell phone. She had the ability to do like the press 1, to make a payment, press 2. So the insurance company lapsed the policy and she passed away several months later. But her life insurance was still effective. Why? Because she had made the payment on the touch dial.
Right.
And they didn't catch it. So even though they received the premium payment, right, they denied it. And her loved one that called me, and we said, okay, well, let's pull the phone records. Phone records show she made a call to her life insurance company in the month they claimed that it lapsed.
Yeah.
And here's the premium leaving her account.
Wow.
Oh, sorry about that. We accidentally lapsed it. Here's your money. Right? I mean, it's
crazy.
The type of games, or if it's not a game, it's just sloppy, right? It's disheartening, but it's nothing to get, it's nothing to that you'd want to back down off of. It's something that when you know your rights, you learn how to fight back, and that's really what we're here for. It's not to say how bad insurance companies are. Insurance companies make mistakes just like everybody, but they've got to be held accountable for their mistakes too, just like everyone else. So
absolutely. And if you have a situation where you need to get a hold of Chris, you can email him case, CASE, at brochulaw.com. That is BROCHU law.com. We're going to talk about the ducks here in 1 second as we wrap up another episode of Protecting Military Families with Chris Brochu. But Chris, I'm 24. We've talked about it. You're 30. Someone in our age group, maybe a little bit older, buying life insurance, is that a move that should be made, do you think? Or is that something you let play out as you get older when you more start thinking about it? Or is that something to think about now? Stumped you, huh?
You did. And part of the reason you stumped me is I don't want to discourage anyone from doing something that they think is best for their family. But what I can tell you is when an insurance company offers me life insurance for $10 a month, as opposed to my dad for way more than that, right? Depending on our age group, that tells me everything I need to know about what their statistics show. Now, that's me personally. That's not legal advice. That's nothing more than that. Right. If I was a young person, in my own shoes, right, in my own capacity as an individual, again, not legal advice, my advice is that money that I would take, paying into one of those policies, I usually invest it in another way. That's me personally. But again, I don't have kids. I'm getting married next week, right? But I'm not in any scenario where I don't believe that I need it, but certain people might be in a situation where they do. One of the most common ones that I see is someone that has a lot of overhead, right? They've got a mortgage, they've got a family. Maybe their spouse is taking care of their children. Maybe they're the primary earner for their house, husband or wife. And maybe that fits their needs. But the biggest thing is look at the reviews. Ask your agent or your insurance company, how many of these do you actually pay? How many of these, we pay premiums for 20 years. How many of these are actually gonna be paid out, right? Do you ever increase the premiums? Do you ever deny? What are some of the common denials? I mean, those would be the questions that you should ask. But as far as I appreciate your question, but as far as life insurance and purchasing it, I would just say it's a question for you and your family and whatever you all think is best for your family. Truly.
Absolutely. Good information right there. Go back and get it. 104.5 WOKV.com. All right, it's duck time. So here's the background on the ducks. For those that may not know, I work at ESPN 690 most of the time, and outside the window, we've seen all kinds of animals. There's a gator in the pond. There's mean snapping turtles. We have bodyguard geese out there that are chasing people in the parking lot. So it's literally Animal Planet in the parking lot here. But last week, we did a show, the first show of Protecting Military Families. Chris, Justin with Nova Productions. By the way, if you're a business professional, you need video, you need photo, you need anything, you can hit up Justin from Nova Productions. By the way, former TV actor, this guy. He's changed now. He's into video. He's into photography. There's no one else that's doing this type of work in this city, or probably any city, that was a TV actor before this. Okay, so this guy knows what's up. So hit up Justin if you need his help. These two guys are outside, leaving the building, and there's ducks, baby ducks in the sewer grate. What happened? And you guys rescued them? I mean, tell the people what happened out there.
Well, it was one of those experiences where once you see the baby ducks in the storm drain, you're kind of invested, right? Like you've got all these things that you have going on in your day, but they're baby ducks. So Justin and I are leaving the building, and this couple that had just won some tickets on the radio, they're walking out, and this mom duck is circling this pretty large, it wasn't sewer, it's like a stormwater. But basically, we look down and it looks like, when you see the ducks at a fair and you lift them up and you see like the different colors and you're like, great, I won, the teddy bear, or like the Jelly of the Month Club. Well, we look down and we see, okay, we've got probably 10 ducks down there. And Justin and it was a husband and wife, his name was Kenny. Justin and Kenny, they lift this heavy storm drain off, and the ducks all swim up into the pipe. And Justin and I were able to grab 2, but now we've got this family of ducks I mean, little tiny baby. I mean, again, I'm not an animal expert.
Sure.
I wouldn't think more than a week or two old.
Yeah.
I mean, they were small enough
Small.
to fit through. They're walking across the parking lot and ploop, 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 ploop. They're all dropping through the grate. So we hear them squawking into the tube, and we're pretty panicked because we can't reach that far down, and now we've got a situation where there are ducks in one grate and the other. So we end up calling, Jacksonville Fire Rescue. They are the true heroes, right? We call the non-emergency line.
There you go.
At the very least, hey, is there something we can do, right? 4 guys show up, and they saved the day. I mean, Justin and I couldn't have done it without Kenny and his wife, and also the fire department. They're took this long board that you would put someone on, similar to a stretcher,
Like a backboard, yeah.
Yeah, backboard. Thank you.
Mhm.
Not very familiar with the firefighter terminology,
That's
but
all right.
they clang the board against one of the ends of the pipe, kind of create this little current. And as the ducks are popping out, we were able to rescue 6 more, and then I had to get out of there. They had it under control. By the time the TV camera showed up, I figured it was my time to leave. But
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, so I don't know if they ever saved the last 2, but it was a really weird thing, and we just couldn't leave them down there, right?
Sure.
I mean,
What a way to end your radio debut that day, I guess. Walking out, saving some ducks. The TV cameras, by the way.
ripped my suit.
Did you really?
Yeah, like not unsalvageable, but definitely down by the pants, and also, my white shirt has now seen better days. But you know what? It was worth it.
That's really what matters. The TV cameras were from our TV partners, Action News Jax. I ripped my pants on my wedding day. We'll talk about that next week, since you're getting married. So I'll hopefully give you some advice how to not do that. But overall, great story. The ducks were saved thanks to our guy Chris and our guy Justin. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of Protecting Military Families with Chris Brochu. If you need him before next week, brochulaw.com, or if you have a case that you need him to take a look at, email case, CASE, at brochulaw.com. I'm Casey Kurtz. We will talk to you next Sunday. Have a great week.